Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Euphoric, the podcast. I'm here with a very special person who I have been bonding with over the last few months in a mastermind. And Becca is just an expert on shadow work and dark feminine energy. And some of us might be hearing these phrases and being like, what the heck is that? How can it help me? How can it kind of unleash a part of me that maybe traditional self-help hasn't? And obviously, Becca, let me edit that out. Editor, please edit that. And Becca is also a proud alcohol-free woman, so we'll go into her story as well. Becca, how are you doing today?
I am so excited to be here, and I just feel so good about myself after that intro. So thank you for that.
Amazing. I was just telling her that I'm going to focus on the formal intro afterwards, and here I go. I just had to gush all about her because just such amazing things that she's doing. Okay, so first of all, tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll unpack all the questions I have for you around that.
Yeah, so my name is Becca. I'm a mindset and transformation coach specifically for women. And as we have touched on a little bit in this intro, I really focus on a lot of the taboo topics in the industry. And as you will come to know, I have a very bold, assertive, direct, humorous personality. And so the direction I'm really going is wanting to be a safe space where people can talk about all of the things that have question marks surrounding them, right? Shadow work, dark feminine energy, sexuality, money, like all of these emotionally charged taboo topics. I really love being the safe space where people can come and talk about those things and get to the root issue and ultimately transcend them, but also have a laugh. And that's what I've been accomplishing in my business. And so I do focus very heavily on shadow work and the subconscious mind and also femininity. And I would not have it any other way. When I first started out my business, I was really focusing on a lot of the what I call light work. And I just want to preface that when I'm saying light work, I'm not shaming anybody who is in manifestation or meditation or anything. Those are all massive parts of my life that I still use to date. But I realized that there was really something missing, and I went searching for it and I found it and I changed my own life. And now that's the method that I use to change my client's life as well.
Okay, so let's start at a pure one-on-one basis here. If someone's listening to this episode and they're like, what are these words Becca's talking about? What is shadow work as you understand it, and how can it help us?
Yeah, absolutely. So something really funny happened yesterday. Actually, I was being interviewed for a podcast and I brought up dark feminine energy and shadow work. And she was like, that sounds like witchcraft. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's fair. But so shadow work was actually introduced and the research was started in the early 1900s by a Swiss psychologist named Carl Jung. And it's a psychological term for everything that we can't see in ourselves. And so, I mean, what doesn't come back to childhood, right? Everything comes back to childhood, but especially in those developmental years from 0 to 7, we are forming our personality and we are forming our concept of self. And the things that we get love and acceptance and praise for become our concept of self and our personality, while the things that threaten our love, acceptance, or belonging, or that get shunned or rejected or whatever it may be, they get cast into the shadows and that becomes our shadow personality. And so a really hot take that I have is that we don't actually always know ourselves best. I think that's a lie that we are fed, you know yourself best, you know yourself best. But we actually only know ourselves through our concept of self if we don't do the work to get to know our ego and our entire personality. And so there are actually parts of our personality that can come out that we can be like, oh, that was so out of character. I hear that a lot, or I don't know what came over me, or that was so out of character, or you just feel stuck and you can't understand why. And 99% of the time, this can really come back to your shadow side. So we really have to get to know that dark side of our personality. And that dark side consists of negative emotions. It can consist of thoughts, traumas, whether it be big T trauma or little t trauma, and just things that we don't accept as a part of our identity. But even though we deny them and we attempt to cast them out, we cannot get rid of them, right? Emotions are energy, they live in the body. So we have to integrate that part of our personality so we can live as a whole being. And also so we can stop have things come into our life that we don't understand how it happened. I think so many people can reflect on situations and they're like, I don't know what came over me, or that was so out of character. I can't believe that I did that. And I want to invite you into understanding that that actually is your character, but it's not who you decide that you are on a conscious level. And a really, really excellent example that I always use, and this was so classic, was one of my best friends who's also in the industry. She said to me one day, I'm just not an angry person. And I was like, oh my God, like my shadow work ears were just like bing, 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 like opportunity for growth. Right. So she's like, I'm just not an angry person. And I was like, ooh, like my understanding of the world is that all humans are all things. Like we all experience the same emotions, thoughts, and we're all susceptible to those same things. And so I was like, with that understanding, I really want to invite you to explore the part of you that is actually an angry person. And so she committed to over the next week, like seeing the times in which she was actually experiencing anger. And the next day I woke up and she had sent me like a 7-minute long voice note over text message of all the things that have made her angry that day. And the truth is that was always happening, but our brain will delete things that don't match our concept of self, and we can be so blind to them. So this really allows you the opportunity to get to know yourself on a very deep level, integrate all parts of your personality so that you don't have to experience shame when they come out, and just be a whole being, essentially.
Yeah. So as far as I understand it, in your friend's scenario, it's like being angry was either frowned upon or something that didn't get, the attention or whatever she needed as a young child. So she probably repressed those emotions and feelings and started inhabiting this space or this identity of like, I am not an angry person. Being an angry person is not a good thing. And therefore, like you said, we still experience all those emotions, but she's not allowed herself to ever tap into that. So it just gets like hidden and expressed in all these weird ways that aren't probably serving her.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that was such a beautiful example. And there are so many other examples that I could pull on. But it's just really sad because the way that I view our shadow self is like they're just these feelings and friends that we have within our body that are just like dying to come out, right? Because they're a natural part of our personality. But through our upbringing, they have been suppressed and they've been rejected and they're not free to show themselves. But the truth is, like, we all are all things. And we're only happy to identify with like positive characteristics. We're not happy to identify with things that are deemed as not good or bad rather. And so even something as simple as being a liar, like many people would not be comfortable admitting to themselves or to others that they are a liar. But even something as simple as when your partner asks you like, is everything okay? Right? Like you're taking on, like you're being quiet and like your partner asks you, is everything okay? And it's not. But as a classic woman, sometimes we're like, yeah, I'm fine. Like that's a lie, right? That is a lie. There are so many ways in which we lie, even if it's like a white lie, or even if it's around Christmas time, like even if it's for good reason, we do lie, but we're just so not okay with accepting that part of ourselves. And we don't identify with being a liar, even though all humans lie. Like all humans are all things. And so what I really try to accomplish in shadow work is neutrality. Like that's where I really try to live at all times, because if I react to something in a way that's undesirable or doesn't match my concept of self, and then I go into like a massive like shame cycle and start spiraling, like I just aspire to have neutral energy surrounding all of my characteristics, all of my emotions, all of my thoughts, and make them all feel welcome and safe to show themselves so that when they do, I can observe them and get to know them better so I can more easily control how and when they come out. Because when anger is like super, super suppressed within us, that's why we lash out, or that's why we have out of character moments, because we can't control it because it's not a part of ourselves that we allow to be seen. So when you can actually start to have a healthy integration of lying or a healthy integration of anger or frustration or whatever it is, life becomes just a lot more enjoyable and a lot more neutral because we don't have to go into those shame cycles that many of us tend to go into.
Yeah. Okay. So many questions from this. And something that's just standing out to me too, to really reference is like, why does this matter? There's so much evidence now about the mind body connection that even top scientists and studies are showing that even things like cancer or heart disease could actually have underlying causes of repressed anger, repressed sadness, repressed emotions, because those are the things we buried. So this is actually really important, not just from an emotional perspective, but I think from a health perspective as well. So a couple questions. First is, do we sometimes see the shadow, the things that we do not like about ourselves reflected in other people? And then how would that dynamic play out?
What an excellent question that was. What an excellent question. So, just to preface, I have a 6-week shadow work course, and one of the weeks is all about projections, which is essentially the question that you just asked. And so, there is a famous quote, and I'm not going to say it verbatim, but essentially it is that we don't actually see the world, but we see what's real and reality in our mind laid as a blanket over other people, right? Like that essentially is what it is. And so when I first got into shadow work, it was actually in the context of psychotherapy. And this was really where my therapist wanted to go, like hard and fast. And I was super resistant to it. And one of the first things she did was get me to bring to mind someone that irritated me, gave me the ick, like even made me angry. And she's like, what do you have in common with this person? And I was like, nothing, right? Like I was so upset. Like I was like, nothing. Like it was someone that really, really irked me. And so that question was super, super triggering. And so what I like to preface is not everything has to be viewed in the lens of shadow work. Like I think when we learn shadow work, we start seeing shadow work everywhere. And so sometimes what can happen is that clients will come to me and they'll be like, "Oh, my boyfriend just cheated on me and like I'm feeling super reactive and I'm feeling somatically in the body. Like what's the lesson here for me?" And I'm like, "No, like nope, no lesson, right? This is just a shitty experience and like it's allowed to be a shitty experience and there's validity in that." But sometimes when it comes to projection, we have to ask ourselves like, why am I feeling this way? Right? What could potentially be the lesson here for me? And so what you were talking about when you were asking there is truly projection. So the way I kind of describe it is when we're talking about triggers, which is basically a sister, we can say they're sisters. One of them is triggers, one of them is projections. So a trigger is when we're seeing something and feeling something somatically in the body, and it's getting a it's giving a somatic response from our body. That's when I really invite people to take a look at why you are reacting, because odds are if you're reacting somatically, there's something that needs to be looked at within you, right? Because if someone came up to you and started screaming at you on the street and said, like, you have purple hair, like your skin is blue, and like started going off, like you would be like, okay, this is a weird experience, right? This is not a normal experience that I'm having. But you probably wouldn't feel agitated. You probably wouldn't have a reaction in the body because like that's not true. Sometimes when people get triggered because they get told something, they have something reflected to them, they can feel it really somatically in the body. And that's when we have to actually ask ourselves, like, is there potentially a lesson here for me? Maybe the delivery from the person wasn't awesome, but if you're feeling it in your body, there's a reason why. And then in the opposite, when we're talking about projection, if you're watching television or you're watching reality TV and like you're super engaged and you're super activated and like just so enthralled with this, like we have to ask ourselves why. What's so interesting, especially about reality television, is there are certain villains and stuff like that that people quote unquote hate, right? They hate them, they're above them. And then I'll see on their social media that they follow that person, right? If you hate that television character, you hate that reality star, and you're above them and you're above their behavior, why would you follow them? Right? So often we're meeting parts of ourselves through other people. And so if you don't identify as an angry person or a liar or whatever it may be, but you have people in your life, whether it be like an intimate relationship or people you follow on social media that are showing you that part of yourself, you get to experience wholeness. Even though the wholeness is not coming from you, if I'm in a relationship with someone who's extremely angry and extremely emotionally unavailable, and I am too, but I'm not ready to admit that to myself, I'm going to attract in people and experiences that show me those things because I get to feel wholeness, even though I'm not gaining that wholeness through my own experience. Other people are like the missing puzzle piece. So sometimes other people through projection can be the missing piece of the puzzle for us that allows us to experience wholeness and normalizes things for us until we're actually ready to accept that that's a part of ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And it's also just like a good signal that like that might be part of our shadow or that part of that repression because like we do not accept that it's okay with us, but then it irks us about that other person, right? Like, why are they doing that? And one of those like really like benign, silly examples that I have of this is my husband. So when he was younger, at like his early 20s, he loved to like streetcar race. Like he was into fast cars and had like a sports car and everything. And then he grew up and he matured and now he's like a really safe driver. But when someone is speeding around him or like, just like changes lanes real quickly or something, he gets so irked, like so frustrated. And I promise you, like, I don't even see it. Like, none of this ever happens to me. I don't like drive around shitty drivers, and if I do, it like does not bother me more than like 1 second, but he's like, it pays so much attention to it. And I'm like, there's probably part of himself, I think, in my little, analysis of him that he never really like forgave or accepted about himself when he was doing it when he was younger. And now it's like when it comes out, obviously, with other people, it's just the thing that bothers him. And I feel like he kind of does attract it more because when I'm with him, it's like happening more. And I'm like, this never happens when I'm driving, which is just so funny. So, like, just even a silly thing like that. Like you said, some things are just like shitty random things, but like sometimes it could be evidence that maybe there's that part of us that we're not personally accepting. So once we get a clue that maybe our shadow is trying to come out and that this is something that we were repressing for a while, you mentioned healthy integration. How would someone go about doing that? What does that even mean?
Yeah. So there's going to be different stages of this. And this is what can be really, really hard to accept when it comes to mindset work, personal development work in general, but specifically shadow work. I think you would probably agree with me that if many people could just come into learning a new skill or tool and they could have like a 3-step process and their whole life would be perfect, like they would probably take it. But there is some delayed gratification when it comes to personal development work and shadow work, right? We have to keep working at these things. And so when it comes to integrating our shadows, what a lot of people don't understand is that there is space between the emotions that we feel and the behavior and the pattern that we play out. There is space in between those two things. So even if it's small, and this is an extreme example, there is space between the anger that I feel and the decision that I make hypothetically to punch someone in the face, right? So the more time we spend observing ourselves and analyzing ourselves, the more space we create in between the emotion and the behavior. So what this is really going to look like, if we're being realistic in the beginning stages of a shadow work journey, is you are going to catch yourself after the behavior has already played out. And that's okay. Because right now that space is about a millisecond, right? Where luckily and fortunately, and I'm so grateful for me after years and years of shadow work, I'm at a point in my life now where I feel the emotions coming on and I know what my instinctual reaction would be in that moment, but I often choose differently because it's just not in alignment with how I want to carry or lead myself in this season of my life and moving forward. And so what that often will look like is catching yourself after the behavior. And so what we actually need to do in that moment is stop and go into investigator mode, right? Okay, interesting. I just lied. Who did I lie to? What happened? What did they ask me? What did I say? Why? And an example that I'd like to give is like, if a boss comes into your office and is like, hey, did you finish that project that I assigned to you? And you're like, oh yeah, for sure. Like I did. Let me just get that and put that on your desk like later today. And that was a lie and you actually didn't. Okay, let's go into investigative mode, right? Your boss came into your office, you lied. What was the reason? Why couldn't have you just said, actually, you know what? I've been super swamped and that hasn't been a priority for me this week, but let me make a commitment to you that that will be on your desk by the end of the day. Is maybe the truth that you are too busy fucking around on TikTok or Instagram at work to complete your assignment. And maybe you feel a little bit of shame about being honest that you haven't done that or completed that. Like we're able to see and unpack like why we felt the need to lie in that moment. Okay, we didn't want to let him down or we didn't want to seem unprofessional. And what was the real reason for why that project wasn't done? So we have to be able to do analysis on ourselves, which is very difficult because what most people do is they go into shame. They just go straight into shame. And I have a very unique relationship with shame because I think it is so pointless. We literally go into shame. We have a little pity party for ourselves. Like, oh my God, like, I cannot believe I did that. Like, I'm just the worst person ever, blah, blah, blah. Then we cast that shadow back into the unconscious because we're not taking any responsibility. We're not observing ourselves at all. We're not trying to understand why it happened. We're just having a sad little pity party for ourselves and then doing nothing to to prevent the behavior from coming in the future. So we have to be in like a little observer era for a bit where we're seeing ourselves play out undesirable traits or behavior, and we're actually analyzing ourselves and getting to know ourselves more so that we can prevent that from happening in the future. We can prevent it from happening in the future more frequently, and we can ultimately create space in between the emotions and the behaviors that we choose differently. I am still the same person. For anyone who's into astrology, I am triple fire signs across the board. Like I am very spicy. I can be very aggressive, like all of those things. But especially with people who are so meaningful to me, such as my partner, sometimes after a long day, if he says something to me, absolutely, I can still feel that part of me coming out that wants to say, like, are you joking? Right? Like, absolutely, I can still feel that part of me, but I love him and I respect him. And so he doesn't deserve that. Right. And ultimately, it's not about him, it's displacement from something else that has gone wrong in my day. So I choose differently. I just choose differently in that moment. And it's because of the space that I've created in between the emotion and the behavior.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like to me, like the more that we can recognize that, like, this is coming up, this is also okay. It's acceptable to feel this way instead of like repressing it or diving, I think, into shame, like the way you're mentioning it is almost like shame makes us feel like we have done something productive. Like, okay, well, I felt a lot of shame for it. You know what I mean? But we
Yeah.
really aren't. And then we're just likely causing a cycle where we're going to do the same thing again because we feel so ashamed. Obviously, comes up a lot with drinking too. But when we like really allow ourselves to feel it, we accept it, we understand where it's coming from, then we can choose to react differently with that bit of space and that bit of mindfulness.
Yeah, exactly. I love what you said about shame too. But yes, that's exactly it. And just the more we work at it, the more space we do create. I want to just stress again that it's not going to be overnight. Like I've been working at this stuff for a long time, but it's worthwhile to be able to choose differently and treat yourself better, treat your partner better, treat your employees better, whatever it is. But the more we work at it and the more we have a neutral approach to it, right? If I have lied or if I have had an anger outburst, like just to have a more neutral approach to it and just be like, ooh, okay, let's unpack why this happened instead of just crying and saying, like, oh, I'm just not worthy of your love. Like, I'm just the worst person ever. Like that, you're not doing anything productive with that or effective. So just take that maybe shame that you are feeling, and maybe sometimes rightfully so, right? Because the definition of shame is that we have consciousness of doing something wrong or foolish. So maybe you are rightfully feeling shame, but use that shame as a moral compass to make better decisions moving forward and actually take a look at your behavior, unpack why it happened so that you can have more time and space next time to make a different decision so that you don't have to feel shame.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love this topic so much. I want to also ask you more about dark feminine energy. And if you have any book recommendations, we'll get to them just at the very end. But
Yeah.
switching topics into that, like again, 101, what the heck does that mean? What does, just unpack that for us, please, too.
Yeah. So I think very quickly when people say like masculine and feminine energies, people can go really quickly into gender roles. And I do just want to preface that this has absolutely nothing to do with your gender, your identity. In absolutely anyone and everything, we have masculine and feminine energies. It's like yin and yang, day and night, like duality really, really exists. So I'm just going to give like a high level overview. So when we're talking about masculine energy, the masculine energy is very action based. So it's focused on doing rather than being. And then the feminine energy is very much focused on flowing and on being rather than doing. And so when we're actually talking about dark feminine energy is one half of the divine feminine. So light and dark make up a whole, which is the divine feminine. And so in this day and age, we have really learned to reject our dark feminine energy. And dark feminine energy, again, it can sound so scary, right? But it's actually not the negative aspect of the feminine, but rather it's the very dark, fiery, transformational shadow aspect of womanhood. So we can already see it makes a lot of sense that shadow work and dark feminine make a lot of sense to show up together in my business. So right now, the world is very comfortable or getting comfortable, depending on where you live, with the feminine. But we take a lot more easily to the light feminine, right? Like the nurturing and sweet and like people pleaser, like that's accepted. But sometimes when women are coming out of the gate with like being super fearless and bold and powerful and magnetic, like some people still cannot handle that. And so when we are talking about the dark feminine, I really want you to bring to mind like celebrities such as Rihanna or Beyonce or Megan Fox or Angelina Jolie. Like these are really good representations of women who are in their dark feminine energy. So when women are tapped into their dark feminine, and the dark feminine energy traits I really want to use are passionate, seductive, authentic, fearless, powerful, magnetic, fierce, transformational, right? When women are really tapped into that, they are so powerful. And when women are so powerful and standing in their power and standing in conviction of what they know, we are a threat to many, many structures in this world. And so we shun and repress women away from a lot of the dark feminine traits that are within us so that we can continue to be disconnected from our power and also each other. Like if women were super confident, fearless, bold beings, can we just have a moment of silence for like the amount of businesses that would go out of business that profit off of our insecurities and profit off of us feeling like shit about ourselves, right? Like the world would drastically change if women showed up in their power. So I help my clients understand the darker feminine aspect of themselves and help them with routines and rituals that connect us back to that part of ourselves. So we don't feel like we can only show up in like the light feminine, right? Like the airy, like feminine, flirty, cute, palatable. Like, no, you can be confident, you can be sexy and seductive, you can do all of that stuff. And that's my like that's kind of my high level overview of dark feminine energy. It's just like that vibe.
Yeah. So it sounds like to me like some of the things that like we were told by society that we can't be. You know what I mean? It's like being a
Yes.
woman is that complicated paradox of like you can't be too much this, you can't be, you have to be a little bit of it. You can't like have, speak up too much, but you have to be like have some kind of a voice. So it's like we're always trying to like walk this little tightrope. And I think really leaning into the places where we are too much or we are that seductress or that passionate person or that powerful person feels dangerous to us, as a woman in society that's always kind of really looked down to that and even potentially, um, that made it us not safe. You know what I mean? From history lessons and stuff like that. When women were really standing in that power, they literally got executed or in jail or something like that. So I'm sure there's a lot of wounds we still have in so many ways that are kind of reacting to the lack of safety we might not be able to feel when we really are embracing that, which is really interesting, but also can feel so empowering. Even the examples that you shared for us, like Beyonce is such an icon, and she's
Yeah.
like changed the way we think of sometimes even womanhood and what that looks like, and being so fierce by expressing that version of ourselves. And we all like look up to that in so many ways, even if it's not like necessarily the music that we are like love. Like everybody really kind of does in so many ways. And some people they don't. Like some people are more a little bit more triggering or a little bit more like too dark, like the reality stars you might be talking about and stuff like that. So very fascinating. What can we do to like express more of that dark feminine energy or give her a place to live within our kind of world or identity?
So this is going to sound so hilarious, but don't turn off the podcast just yet. But the first thing I always suggest is shadow work. And the reason is there's a reason why we are suppressing a lot of our dark feminine characteristics. And that's going to be unique for every single person. So when we can actually bring those to the surface and understand why we are suppressing them, we can ultimately integrate them in a healthy way and stand in our power. So shadow work is always the first thing that I say. Connecting to your cycle is a big one because we are really connected as women to Mother Earth. Like we are her, she is us. And so we are very much a mirror, like the 4 seasons, the moon cycle, the elements. And so living in connection and in flow with your cycle can be a really powerful way to connect to your dark feminine energy. Another one is healing your feminine relationships, because just like you said, we used to live in a different time where we would be executed and we would be turned against each other. And so many of us still carry like very deep feminine wounds. And as women, I really see us as a community. I don't see other women as my competition. And I think if you are someone that really sees other women as your competition, that is a very sure sign that you probably have some deep feminine wounds, because women's bonds, they were forced to be broken, right? And they were turned against each other for safety. And how you show up in your relationships with women, it's really, really telling about where you at in regard where you're at, sorry, rather, in regards to your relationship with the dark feminine. And then some other things we can do is embracing our sexuality and sensuality, right? I think many of us are very much in our masculine energy and we're just on autopilot and we don't take the time to like smell the roses, if you will. And so I'm a person that's very in touch with all of my five senses and try to make everything I do like a sensual experience and fun. And I'm always like, how can I make this more enjoyable? How can I make this a vibe? And that's really, really helped. And the last thing I'll say is the esoteric practices. Like, you don't have to be like a full blown witch and like doing all this stuff. Like, no, but just connecting with some esoteric practices, like whether that be tarot or astrology or spell work or dark moon rituals, like whatever it is, it just really helps us integrate the dark feminine into our personality, which can be really, really exciting. And it's honestly such a cool feeling when you can just like tap into that part of yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'm not too familiar, but I know that Carl Jung also had like the ideas of archetypes that we have like as a collective consciousness, these different archetypes, even people who had never grown up in that culture, like still had these dreams about these different archetypes. And I do find that there's very solid ones behind the different stages of womanhood, that have kind of been lost a little bit. And then we go through that stage and, especially a woman who's aging, for example, it's like completely shunned by our society. Let's like youthify her and give her all the de-aging things and all that kind of stuff. Like it's just not even an acceptable place to be in your
Yeah.
life. You know what I mean? So I'm sure all of that will really help. And something you said earlier about like finding not only yourself through this kind of work, but like enhancing your life's sensuality and pleasure, I think is really key to touch upon, especially as someone's embarking on an alcohol-free lifestyle. Because in my estimation, when we use alcohol as a source of fun, as a way to mask boredom, as a way to have some excitement or adventure in our life, it's actually a really loud cry from our brain that it's lacking that level of stimulation and that we don't have enough pleasure in our lives. So one of my favorite things about this show is bringing other incredible leaders and experts into my audience that are not able to just share about their fascinating topics, but also represent the alcohol-free lifestyle, because I'm convinced it's the most intuitive, badass women in the world who choose this. So,
Period.
Becca, how did you decide to reevaluate the role of alcohol in your life, and what did that process look like for you?
Yeah, so this is such an interesting story to kind of unpack, and we'll just do a high level overview. But I was never someone that really enjoyed drinking. I really didn't. I was always the DD. It just wasn't really my vibe. And when I went through a major heartbreak and life change about 6 or 7 years ago now, I, did what anyone naturally does. I fled the province, and I started working at a hotel. And that hotel was on top of a glacier, and there was absolutely nowhere to go and nothing to do. And so the way that I would deal with my heartbreak and the way that I would unwind after work and the way that I would connect with people would be alcohol. And I look back on that time and I'm just like, oh my goodness, like who is she? She is so different than the me that stands before you today. She was going to work like still under the influence, like absolutely wild. And during that time, I lost myself even more. And I also gained 60 pounds during that multi-month period, which shows you just how negatively alcohol and I have a relationship. And I got home and I just felt so lost. I was like, none of my issues got resolved. And actually now I have more issues because now I want to get back to feeling better about myself and like getting my body back to a healthy weight. And for the next couple of years, I would drink periodically. And I just got to a place a year ago this month, go me, my 1 year anniversary, where I was like, do I even enjoy this? Or is this just kind of like an expected thing that I do because I feel awkward saying no? Like I feel like the black sheep saying no. And I was like, I don't actually think I truly enjoy this. Like I don't crave this. I don't do this on my own account. I just say yes because I feel awkward saying no. And I was like, I want to try to take a month off and just see like how I feel and how I react to certain questions that come my way and just go from there. And now here we are, it's middle of October and I'm quickly approaching my 1 year anniversary. I've never gone back. Like, I think you and I obviously are so similar in that a lot of the benefits that we notice right away are very similar. Like I am just a hoe for my sleep, and my sleep hygiene and my sleep quality just went up majorly. And I was able to connect with people differently in social settings because I felt truly present with them with a lack of alcohol. And it just felt really good to stand in my power and say, no, I don't wish to do something, even when it was triggering to other people, even when it brought on uncomfortable questions. Like, to be able to withstand that discomfort and stand in the power of what I know to be best for me, it translates in different areas of my life, even business. So it's just, it can be so difficult. And I do want to just like send love to anybody who's a part of the alcohol free community, especially as a woman. People ask really silly questions about if you're pregnant or if you're like a recovering alcoholic. And it's just like, you know what? Like, can it just be okay that I don't want to drink? And people can try to make you feel really uncomfortable. But from a shadow work perspective, as we have talked about, right? If it's activating them and triggering them that much that you're choosing not to drink, that's an invitation for them to ask themselves why they care, right? It doesn't impact them. And it shines a light on how much they depend on alcohol. So I feel so wonderful without it. And I'm lucky that a majority of people in my life have been so supportive in my alcohol-free journey. And I know that I'll never drink alcohol again. It's just not in the cards for me. And I'm going to be a sober queen for the rest of my life.
Well, Slay Queen, I mean, I love that story. It's just like coming home to self and coming home to what we truly want, not what was expected of us. Even when someone does like at first like their relationship with alcohol, like it's like a rethink of like, is this still serving me? Like I'm not 20 or 25 or whatever it was anymore. Is this really helping me to be the version I want to be? And it's a really bold move because, like you said, it is so expected. I once heard this story of someone who like wasn't drinking for a while and would still like hold a glass while or order something that had alcohol in it and pretend to sip it. And I was like, why would a grown adult find themselves the need to do that? And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm not saying anything like bad. Like, it is hard in our society to stand for the alcohol free lifestyle. It sucks that society has put on such a heavy expectation that we have to drink, or else it means horrible things about you. You know what I mean? One or the other, right? You're either a boring prude or you are, this crazy recovering alcoholic or something like that. And so it's interesting that it like that's what we're dealing with the society that we live in, but it's also like such a growth opportunity. Like, what does it mean and look like for you to grow into the person who is bold enough to say no and to do what is right by you and to live your life aligned by your values and not care what other people think? And I think it's also an amazing growth opportunity. That's why so many of the women I work with go on to do such big things. It's like that lesson already taught them the lesson they needed and not worrying about what other people think. And now it's just like, well, I'm scared to post something, or I'm scared to announce my website or my new career or whatever. And not like that fear doesn't completely go away, but it's like you already went through the lesson. Like, you can't live your life for these side characters that aren't even going to matter at the end of the day. Like you're just going to come to resent it. Well, I love to hear this story. I'd love to just show people that there's so many of us in this world who are redefining what it means to be a non-drinker, going after their bigger dreams, and really helping heal the world in so many different ways. I love the work you do. Becca, could you share with us any books that you found helpful on your journey?
Yeah,
Like more the shadow
absolutely.
work angle.
From the shadow work angle, so I wouldn't necessarily say that I have read a lot of books that necessarily say like shadow work. And the difficult thing about shadow work is that I think a lot of people believe that they're doing shadow work because they find articles online or quotes or journal prompts on Pinterest. But true shadow work can really mess with your human psyche and your subconscious mind. So I actually think it's a really beautiful thing to not be able to access shadow work for just anyone on the internet who decides that they want to do a journal prompt on a beautiful Monday afternoon at 3 o'clock. You know what I mean? I don't actually think that should be readily available to every single person. But I will list off a couple books that have just really helped me bring out some of the shame points that are within certain categorizations of my personality. The first one, everyone take a big deep breath if you're not comfortable with this word. But the book is actually called Pussy by Regina Thomas Hauer. I might be absolutely butchering that, but I know that her name is Regina, but it's called Pussy, a Reclamation. And this was a really beautiful book for a lot of the feminine wounds and a lot of the shame that we feel about our own body, our own sexuality. Like they were all really interconnected. Another book for any women that are out there with big goals and dreams like us. It sounds kind of cliche and you've probably heard it before, but You Are a Badass at Making Money is actually a really beautiful book to be able to unpack like a lot of the thoughts and beliefs that you have about money and your money story that actually hold you back from being able to live your most successful and wealthy life, whatever that looks like for you. So I think as I started out at the beginning of this podcast by saying that I'm really interested in like the taboo, emotionally charged topic, I think sex and money are a really beautiful place to start.
Well, I love those books. I definitely recommend You Are a Badass at Making Money. And I've been hearing about Pussy for so long that you just needed one more person to recommend it for you. And now you know you have to go buy it immediately. And I'm just going to add to that. This year, I read this book called Existential Kink. And it's this idea that like if like obviously you have to buy into this hypothesis, but if let's say we chose to come to this planet, if we are all connected, if we are all kind of divine in a certain way, then part of us did choose some of the experiences that we're having. And so like accepting that and also being like, what part of this do I actually like? What part of me gets pleasure from this? So for example, let's say that you are, running a household and have a job and you still do everything at home. Like you have to clean and make the food and all this kind of stuff. And you resent it so much. You're like upset with your husband or partner. You hate that you're carrying all this load and stuff like that. But that also secretly makes you feel righteous. And you get to walk around every day feeling so righteous and like you're the martyr and you get to do everything. And so like that was like just one example to show like part of you actually does like this, even though you claim that you hate it and stuff. And you actually have to be willing to accept that you like it. And therefore you'll be able to like let it go and integrate it a little bit more. And so it's kind of like, what's the hidden benefit of feeling feelings that we actually say that we don't like? Even something like scarcity. I was working on this with my coach. When we feel scarcity, even though we don't like that feeling, what if that's another way of feeling certainty of like, oh, I can always count on this kind of scarcity or feeling or whatever, you know what I mean? So that's also been like a total good deep dive for me to get into and stuff, but very fascinating, just so much on this. Obviously, go follow Becca, go check out her course and all the lovely things she's doing. Where can people find you?
Yeah, really quickly, I wanted to say that book that you read quite literally is shadow work. And in my shadow work course, I actually go through a process with my clients at the end where we choose like a specific shadow that they deem to not like. And through this process, we actually get to pull out like a lot of the ways that they benefit and a lot of the things that they get to still do while playing into this shadow. And then the very last question is, are you actually ready to give this part of yourself up? 99% of them say no. Right. So it's something that you're saying, I don't want this to be a part of my experience anymore. I don't want this to be associated to my personality anymore. But when it comes down to what you would actually have to stop doing and playing into, if that was no longer a part of your personality, they actually are not ready to give that up. So I love that book. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm absolutely going to add that to my list. You can find me on Instagram at Becca Nicholls. So it's BECC because Becca Nicholls is taken. If you happen to be listening to this and you have that at Becca Nicholls handle, please give it to me. I will pay you. I also have a link in my bio that takes you to my TikTok, which is Better with Becca, my YouTube channel, and I have my own podcast called There She Glows podcast, and Karolina has been on the podcast. It was an absolutely incredible episode that I highly recommend. So if you are a Karolina stan, I would highly recommend listening to that episode.
Amazing. Well, we will definitely put that all in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I know I learned a lot. I hope the audience learned a lot. And it's just so incredible. I think that no matter where we are on our growth journey and we've kind of tried a lot of things, like I feel like the most hopeless situation you can be in is like, I've literally tried everything and I'm still stuck. And so I hope that this episode just offered you like another angle or another method or modality to be able to kind of unpack some things and really grow in yourself, because that's like the most just hopeful belief I can ever have, whatever it is, whether it's the health or my personal development or my business, as long as I know there's stones still unturned and there's still so much growth and things to do, I don't feel stuck anymore. I know that there's like a level of growth awaiting me. But when I feel like I've tried everything, this doesn't work, then it's like hopeless. You know what I mean? So thank you for offering this lens to us. I think it'll be super helpful for the audience.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me.